Hello, hello, everyone, and welcome to our next interview. I'm excited about today's guest because we're going to be talking about really reimagining leather. And for many of us vegans out there, we want products that are not harming animals. We want products that are really reimagining also the kind of supply chain of everything that we do. And what I'm excited about our guest today is she's playing a pivotal role in that. This is an opportunity for us to really bring kind of veganism through many of the products that we all buy every day and being able to get those options really in everything that you purchase. Because I feel like sometimes, there's the frontier around food that there's been amazing advances in. But when it comes to products like, purses, shoes, even down to buying a car, many of us struggle because we don't maybe see the alternatives that we hope should be there and ultimately we believe must be there for us to have not only a better planet but also make sure we're saving animals. So tonight, or today I should say, I'm excited about today's guest because hopefully we're going to be diving into how do we all kind of understand what is vegan leather. I'm also really curious to kind of talk about what is in vegan leather because for many of us, we're just curious. Now, I've done a little bit of research, I have some ideas, but many of you who are maybe listening today, you may be wondering, how does it come about? How is it produced? How is it created? And also, how do we have amazing people like our guests today that are leading the charge and helping make us as consumers not only better and smarter consumers, but consumers that can continue to bring the message forward of taking animals out of products and also being able to still have a fancy, cool, slick, beautiful outfit as well. Because the idea is that we should not have to go into fashion and mean that animals have to be harmed. So, without further ado, let me just say hello to Stephanie Downs, our guest today. Stephanie, thanks so much for joining me.
Happy to be here. Nice to join you, Stephanie.
Perfect. So before we get into Uncaged, before we get into specifically, the venture that you're working on now, let's rewind the clock a little bit. Let's give
Okay.
people a little bit of background because what I think is amazing about who you are and what you've done is you've been very active in not only the movement, you've been an entrepreneur for many, many years, and also you've been an activist. So I think just so everyone kind of knows where you come from in a sense. Let's give them a little bit of background on what roles you've played before, bringing Uncaged into the world.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, it's a long kind of windy journey, which I think is a good lesson for everybody to say, stay the course, you will find your path. So for me, my background is all in business, mainly in marketing. I started my first company in 1999, which was a digital marketing company, which is not interesting today, but in 1999, you had to explain to people what that was. And so it was a good time to get in on that. But at that time, that was actually around the time that was kind of the beginning of my path toward veganism. I was a meat eater. And then I started volunteering at an animal shelter just to really kind of decrease some stress from being an entrepreneur. Next thing I know, I'm on the board of directors. I'm running the annual fundraiser. Then I went vegetarian. Then I went vegan, and just kind of really just fell in love with my love of animals and found my place, and that ultimately led me to doing work for PETA, helping PETA out, doing corporate negotiations, and which meant that I would go meet with various global companies and talk to them about why they should want to remove animals from the supply chain. So I worked with various fashion brands. I worked with Tesla and going vegan on their interiors, and just different all kinds of different projects, from glue traps to leather interiors. And then I sold my first company in 2014. And then I had an opportunity working with New Crop Capital, which is now called Unovis Partners, a venture capital firm, to start a company in the plant-based food space. And long story, but I ended up starting a company in India with a couple local partners, and really just saw that as an opportunity because not a lot at the time was going on in India concerning plant-based meats or vegan foods, and really wanted to do something to spark something there. So we started what quickly became the largest plant-based meat company in India. India. And I was part of that venture and led that venture for 3 years, and then exited and decided to get into materials, mainly because of the work I'd done for PETA, just seeing the opportunity in the space and seeing what's happening in the leather alternative space right now. I wanted to dive in and see if we could come up with an innovation to meet the industry's needs.
That is a perfect introduction, because the idea is, as the movement grows, as more and more people become vegan, the needs grow,
Yeah.
the demand for it grows. And I think that's one of our challenges is, innovation, keeping in line with the demand. So do
Right.
you have a sense of, even from a consumer standpoint, because many of our listeners are vegan professionals, how is the movement and the professional kind of landscape going, where people are starting to really demand these
Yeah.
alternatives and look for these alternatives in, like we talked about earlier, different sectors, different business models, and then within different products?
Sure. And I'll kind of step back a little bit and break it down for people, because obviously, a lot of people might be thinking, well, there's lots of vegan leathers. I can get many things in vegan leather. The challenge, which is one of the reasons that I wanted to get interested in, or I got interested in this segment, is that we're seeing a lot of customer sentiment, in particular brand sentiment, going against vegan leathers, because most vegan leathers, almost all, like 99.9% of vegan leathers, are completely made of plastic. And so now the plastics have improved as much as plastic can over the years, in that most vegan leathers used to be PVC, which is
Mhm.
very, very toxic. Then they became PU, polyurethanes. And the challenge with PUs is the end of life. We're looking at 1,000 years before those materials are going to break down. And so we've seen, to put it in perspective, the animal leather industry is about an $85 billion industry, and the synthetic leather industry is about a $30 billion industry. So collectively, about 115 billion. And the synthetic leather or plastic leather segment, has captured a fair size of the market, but we've really kind of seen that leveling off, and we're seeing brands really turning against moving toward vegan synthetic leathers, because of the end of life. So from a environmental standpoint, on greenhouse gas emissions, water use, land use, vegan leathers are undoubtedly better. And me as a vegan, I'm in this for animal welfare, so I'm personally comfortable with the current synthetic leathers that are out there, because they're keeping direct suffering from happening. But we are seeing customer sentiment change significantly against plastics, and so that's why this what we call the next gen leather industry has kind of evolved, where we're making different types of, not uncaged. We use grain components we use a variety of components for ours, but some people are using mushrooms, some people are using
Mhm.
cactus, pineapples. So there's a
Yes.
variety of innovators working on new innovations.
Yeah, and that's one thing I think is really interesting, is when you're seeing the innovations that are coming out with pineapple and mushroom and so forth. It's kind of exciting, especially
It
as a vegan,
is.
and also as as we become more and more compassionate, we want to
Yep.
make sure that we're saving the animals, but then we're not doing a trade-off for the environment,
Right.
and the other kind of doing the PU leathers and so forth. So, are you finding that people are excited about these alternatives? Do you feel like people are, is the demand ahead of the innovation? Like, where is the innovation and demand? Do you feel like they're like, you know, in the same race in a sense, or do you feel like, one is pushing the other forward?
It's interesting. I'm thankful that Uncaged came in. So we started the company about 2.5 years ago, and I'm kind of thankful that we started a bit later in the game. So when you look at companies like Pina Texas doing the pineapple leather, or Bolt
Mhm.
Threads and Mica Works that are doing mushroom leathers, some of these companies have been around for 10, 14 years, right? So they've kind of laid the groundwork, and they've kind of, they've fought the hard battles, kind of building awareness around the space. So I give them so much credit for that. But I would, but one challenge, some of the challenges we're seeing with some of them is like scaling or price points. There's a variety of different kind of elements, that have kind of made it a challenge for the next gen leather industry to really reach bigger adoption. But I think that we're at a good tipping point. and the demand is just unbelievable. I mean, the amount of we stayed in stealth mode for a while just because I knew how much demand was out there from fashion brands that we just weren't going to be ready to handle it. Because when a fashion brand contacts you, they don't want you to send you a swatch this big, that comes out of
Yes.
the lab. They want you to be able to send them, something like this, that, at least they can do some prototyping and things out of. And I can tell you within the last 3 months, and this was with very minimal outbound marketing. We run a little bit on our Instagram page and stuff, but we're not really doing much outbound. We've had over 65 brands contact us.
Wow.
And I'm talking major global brands. So it's really, the inbound interest is incredible because they're looking for things that are more sustainable. And even though vegan leather is undoubtedly more sustainable than animal leather, it has an end of life challenge.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, when you're working with brands, I mean, maybe whatever you can provide, in this public space, but when you're working with brands, is it a true like partnership? Are you working with them on developing what is that next gen, maybe next options? Or is it more of that you really kind of developed, hey, this is the standard, and then everyone's
Right.
taking that standard and then they're designing more the fashion sense, the design, and so forth? How does that kind of partnership work?
It is definitely a collaboration for sure, which is really fun. But we see a big difference is the small brands that we work with, because we're working a lot of the smaller vegan brands or just smaller fashion brands that care or focus on sustainability are very interested in this, versus if we're working with, we're working with a couple of the largest fashion houses in the world. So, it's drastically different how you proceed through a collaboration with those two different organizations. But yeah, it's very, very much because it's such a creative process for them. For them, this isn't just a plug and play. Like they want to think about how they can use it and how they can message it and stuff. So it's definitely a lot of fun collaboration. And we're also working with automotive brands. So we actually
Love
have
that.
an announcement coming out in the next month or so that one of the major automotive brands just invested in us. So we have, there's a tremendous amount of demand from the electric vehicle divisions across the automotive industry, following suit, on what Tesla did.
I think that is great because I think that's one of the biggest frustrations that many of us have as consumers because many of the what they call the higher trims
Right.
in cars, when
Yes.
you're trying to go for safety features, unfortunately, they come standard, like in leather. They
Right.
don't even come in options for you. And it would be a shame, for someone to give up, safety
Yeah.
for that. So really making sure that consumers have options and also we just take animals out of the equation
Right.
is really the
Right.
key because it's so unnecessary. So how do you kind of, when you think about the work that you're doing day in and day out, like when someone's trying to kind of get a sense of what's it like, not only to be you, but with be in your organization, are you guys thinking about what's next? What's the next kind of tier? What's the next frontier? Are you, because I think this is different for other entrepreneurial businesses because you're working more in a kind of wholesale or like you said, someone's
Mhm.
investing in
B2B.
the future. You're doing more B2B kind of work as opposed to you're working directly with the consumer. So maybe walk us through what that kind of day in the life is like when you're the one creating the materials that all brands around the world could use and you become that driving force and potentially driving change across all of these other businesses.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I think just because of the phase where we're at and where the infancy is of this industry, even though it's been around for a while, it's kind of hovered and hasn't really taken off quite yet, as far as
Okay.
adoption across fashion brands. So you see various brands like, for example, Stella McCartney with bolt threads. People are doing like one-off pieces, but you're not
Hmm.
seeing somebody like a New Balance saying, we're replacing all our leather
Yeah.
with next gen leathers. Like we're not there yet at that tipping point. So quite honestly, I think for us and probably a lot of innovators in the space, it's more right now around getting that market penetration. Just because with these fashion brands and you're looking at an 18 to 24 month time frame from the time you start talking till the time you see something on a shelf, and automotive's even crazier. You're like a 5 year time frame. So at this point, it's just, I think a lot of like the day in the life for me is making the right decisions around where do we put our energy. As a small startup that has so much incoming demand, for example, we get contacted by custom interior decorators. We got contacted by a company that makes one-off custom jets. So like we kind of and you'd be amazed, like the performance requirements for a watch band are drastically different than or different from the custom requirements for, I'm sorry, the performance requirements for a wallet, which is even more different from a shoe, which is more different from a car interior, which is more different, so, you kind of have, I think a lot of the day in life for me is kind of deciding strategically, where do we focus? Where do we put our energy as a startup? Because you've got to survive those startup days and make the right, every decision is a key decision. We can't afford to make the wrong decision.
Absolutely. And that's why I love kind of this conversation we're having today, because often we're talking about like marketing and running a business in real time, in a sense that, like, you're shipping out next week, you're sending out product, or you have a campaign, coming in the next couple of months. And I think, like you said, with your business, it's a much more strategic play. You really have to think about where the trend's going, what are the needs. And like you said, because of production timelines, you really have to have a much stronger kind of strategic mindset. So I guess my follow-up question is going to be around that strategic mindset. Like, how do you stay sharp? How do you make sure you do have a good balance between the short term and long term? Because when I talk with a lot of vegan entrepreneurs, they struggle with finding that balance, because there are the demands of today, there are the meetings we all have to go to, and the emails we have to do. But it can be hard sometimes to think a year, 12 months, 18 months in advance, let alone 5 years in advance.
Yeah. And, I smile because I've been in the business world for decades. And, back in the day when I started my first company, you did this 40-page business plan of, like thinking out what you're going to do every month for the next 5 years and who all you're going to hire. And, now we're kind of gone are the days of that. You do the pitch deck for your investors, or you kind of net it out. And but I do think, there's never any harm in planning out the big picture and then also breaking it down into chunks. So that's something that I personally do to make things less overwhelming. So you might set this, big 1-year goal and then break it down into quarters and then break it down into months. And so that's like with our team, we have, yearly KPIs, but then we break it down into monthly. And just so we're constantly, it makes a big goal seem less overwhelming when you break it down a bit. But yeah, and then I also try to do things like where I only check emails at certain hours, like check them, because I can get sucked into emails really easy. I feel like emails are like boomerangs. You send one out and three come back, so yeah, so I think that's one. I also try to schedule thinking hours where I set, and sometimes I'll even have one of my team be on like video chat with me, and I'll say, okay, for the next hour, I'm going to be working on reviewing our pitch deck, the design work from the pitch deck, and something that I might procrastinate just because it's such a hard thing to think about. You don't want to make the wrong decision, so I'll do like a working session with that where I know that person's staring at me, and within an hour from now they're going to be like, "Where are you at with that?" So I do little tricks like that to just, it's just always so much on your plate as an entrepreneur. It's easy 24/7 job.
Absolutely. And those emails, they are serious. You're right with that boomerang, because it's amazing how many come back after you. You're like, okay, I've done well. I did it. And then it's like, wait a minute, they're coming.
Yeah.
So I know exactly what you mean. Now, one thing that kind of pops in my mind is, how can consumers help with the work that you're doing? How can consumers move things forward? Because, in the food industry, when a lot of these beginning stages were happening, what we had people do was like go to their grocery store and ask people to carry A, B, and C product, or write a letter, or, you know what I mean? And reach out and kind of be consumers. For the work that you're doing, is there a role right now for individuals who are maybe not entrepreneurs or maybe not in the B2B space, and how they can either help create more demand or how they can create more awareness around the work that you're doing?
Yes, I think a couple thoughts. One, if they're a fan of a company that doesn't have good vegan, isn't doing things in vegan leathers, they can always go like submit a comment on their social posts or send an email into, their contact form and say, listen, I love your brand, but I'm a vegan. I'd love to see you have more vegan products. That's kind of just an activist thing we used to do too, the animal welfare groups would encourage people to go entice, tell companies like, that there's demand for these. And then the other thing I think in this situation mentioned, is voting with your dollars. You know, when there are items out there, like, you know, if Stella McCartney comes out with something, or there's various really great, lots of great vegan brands, you know, such as like Luxtra, Melina Butcher, Will's Vegan. You know, there's a variety of other kinds of, you know, more luxury, or, you know, they're going to be more expensive than, you know, maybe going to the mall and picking up something cheap. But, you know, that's another way, like, to support those brands that are really trying to do the right thing. So those are a couple things that that I'd recommend if people have the time and resources.
Yeah. And I think it's so important that we support our vegan businesses,
Yeah.
because that's how we drive the change. That's how we get more products available. And that's also how we, this kind of concept that, veganism becomes part of the fabric of life,
Right.
where you go to the mall, you drop online, everywhere you go, there's an option out there. It's no longer just the, one website you go to, or the two stores, that are 40 minutes away that carry the
Right.
products. The idea is that, there should be options literally almost
Right.
everywhere. And we're seeing that more and more, I think, in other industries. The other
That's what
thing, I guess,
I just, as I say, that's something I try to tell brands, is nobody is more loyal than a vegan. So, I mean, as far as customers go, like, we'll drive to the other side of town. We will totally inconvenience ourselves to go get something that we feel passionate about. Right. And we're loyal too.
Yes.
And so it was, yeah. And we want quality too. I think that the brand, like you were talking about at the beginning, the brands that think that the vegans just want the canvas bags and that kind of stuff. And, that has its place. But, we also want things that look luxurious. And unfortunately, luxury in people's minds, has that nice look to it, or excuse me, leather. So I think that businesses need to remember how loyal vegans can be.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's why a large part of what we do as entrepreneurs has to be education. We really have to spend time helping people understand why we're investing in these products, why we want to make sure that these options are available, because it's true. There's certain things that I can grab when I'm just, going to the grocery store.
Right.
But if I'm going to dress in, like, something nice, I'm going to a
Right.
formal, my burlap bag is not going to cut it. And
Exactly.
the idea is, from head to toe, I really would want to be, you want to be completely vegan from head to toe, because I think, yes, many people may start with the food, but the more and more you bring it into your lifestyle, you start to realize that, okay, I want my shoes aligned, I want my purse aligned, I want those things. And, I came from a generation, and I'm probably telling my age here, but like when I was a kid, the idea is that leather used to be a equal quality of shoes. Like when we were like little kids, they were like, oh, these are the shoes that you want because of A, B, and C. And I think sometimes those seeds get planted deep in us.
Yeah.
And therefore, we have to start educating consumers on what is true value and what materials you should be looking for in your products, because it's not just for longevity that you're looking for. That, it's almost a twist. And I'm probably mixing up like three questions here at once, but you know what I mean? There's the twist of, do you want something to last forever? Because you do want it to last, but lasting forever is really beyond that kind of environmental thing. We do want it to break down, but we also want it to be quality at the same time. So I guess as I unwind this long question I'm asking you is, how do you work through that education process? How do you reprogram people that maybe have some of these deep-seated things that have been passed down to them, but also help them see vegan leather in a new light?
Well, I actually have a pretty quick trick for that, which it works fairly amazingly well. Because skin, people talk about that leather is natural, but it was natural when it belonged to the cow, or, when it just came, when it was skin, but it has to go through a process that is essentially similar to embalming of a body. So when I tell people that leather is embalmed skin, it changes their perspective very quickly. So, they'll be like, wow, I never thought of it that way. And, of course you want
that way.
Yeah. So, and of course you want to do it in a non, confrontational way, but just, because, leather is a skin, and they have to do something to it to keep it from breaking down. So after it's gone through the chemical process, which uses very toxic chemicals, very harsh chemicals, I should say, it's, essentially doing to it how you would embalm a body, to keep it from breaking down. leather, once it gets buried or goes into, end of life, will take probably about 50 years to break down. Whereas like solutions that we're working on will be biodegrade within under a year. And so, that when I kind of go into that, that really kind of sets it straight, because people like to think of leather as natural. So that's more in the fashion industry where they're thinking about that. But for consumers, they do think of luxury. So when I talk about the embalmed skin or the mummified skin, it kind of changes their perspective really quickly. And then, again, a lot of vegan leathers now or almost all are plastic based. So I don't, in the spirit of trying to save animals, I don't really kind of go into that very much with people, because I'm just trying to get them to convert in general to vegan leathers. But if they ask me, a lot of people are becoming more and more aware that synthetics are plastic based, and that's bad for the environment too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the more and more we understand how things are made, I think we have the same challenges on the food side where, we were disconnected from the
Yeah.
process, even from the advertisement, you see the advertisements and there were all this greenery and, animals
Right.
were kind of parading around as if, it's this type
Right.
of lifestyle. And then now we're starting to see what really does happen on these farms and how they truly are turning into factories. It's a very different perspective. And I think for all of the products that we consume, the products that we use, we really have to understand what it takes to get them to our door. What is the process to get them to our door and get them to those ideas where, it feels like it's long lasting. But like you said, that's almost counterintuitive, because
Right.
do you want something that's going to take 50 years to break down? Because that means it's sitting in potentially a landfill, it's really hurting our environment. So it's a different way of thinking about not just consuming products, but a different way of thinking about how and what we are choosing, and also what brands we
Right.
decide to support.
Yeah. And I will say, because before this, as we discussed earlier, I was in the plant-based meat industry, so I come from the vegan food space. The good news is about this segment is that there's much less barriers to entry. People like tech on their body, and they like tech in their cars, and they like change. They want new clothes, new trends, new designs. They don't have they're not as emotionally attached to their leather as they might be to their chicken, or, I just, in general with this industry, I truly feel, even though I think so many wonderful things are happening in the food space and such brilliant people, they're moving that forward. I do think as a planet, we'll probably be wearing and sitting on and sleeping on all vegan materials before everybody's eating all vegan, just because it's just not as hard of an emotional switch for people.
Yeah, that's a really good point to make. And I think sometimes when we think about driving change,
Yeah,
sometimes we have to take the path of least resistance to get
exactly.
someone there. Because once they open up to the message, then they'll be more willing to maybe evaluate and maybe hopefully make some other
Exactly.
changes as well.
Exactly. Plants a seed.
Absolutely, absolutely. So let's make sure everyone, if they want to follow your story, if they want to keep up with the work that you're doing, what is the best way for them to stay in touch, reach out, whether it's social, website, email? What's the best approach?
So first of all, our website is uncagedinnovations.com. So you can go there and get to contact forms and also our social media channels. But given this particular community, I would say find us on LinkedIn also. And our Uncaged Innovations will come right up, and you can keep on track of our story and new announcements. And we also share, study, information about what's going on in the industry in general. So please follow us there, and be a great way to keep in touch.
Perfect. And then as we wrap up today, I always like to ask people kind of to share maybe their personal mantras, things that help them stay motivated, continue doing what they're doing, especially yourself being an entrepreneur for a lot of years. Do you have any advice for anyone out there, whether they're struggling, whether they're
Right.
having a hard time, or they're trying to start a business, or they're just having a bad day, that you
Yes.
use kind of to move forward and continue to do the great work that you're doing?
Yes, and mine's probably sort of unusual compared to other ones you've heard. So I grew up in a family. I was supposed to be the son that my father always wanted, but so he kind of always treated me like a boy, and would, if I was whining about something, he'd be like, "I didn't raise a sissy," and like he just really kind of pushed me along. So I kind of have this when I start to get down, I pump myself up by thinking, about that things could be harder. So I will sometimes say to myself, "Suck it up. You could be a chicken on a factory farm." That's what I'll think to myself. So So it could be
That is
worse.
definitely a
You can
life.
get through this day. It's not that bad, and so just, Matt, you got to fight for them, right? Somebody's got to fight for them. So we're here to take the hard days to hopefully make their lives better.
Absolutely. And I love that. Taking the hard days to make their lives better. We
Yep.
did have someone just stop by. They were saying they love the work that you're doing. Thank you so much, Lucy, for dropping that
Oh,
note
hi,
in here.
Lucy.
So I really, really appreciate having time to kind of talk.
Yeah.
It feels like we could probably talk way, way, way longer, but it's so exciting to see not only the work that you're doing, it's so exciting to hear about this kind of new generation that is coming. And also to hear, about your big announcement coming out soon.
Yeah.
But just knowing that there's more options that are coming to the table. There are more ways that we can change the world, save animals. And it's also exciting to hear that, you have brands like yourself that are looking towards innovation, like you said, bringing tech closer and closer to us, which we all are consuming at large amounts these days. So thank you so much for the work you're doing. Thank you so much for taking some time today to talk about what you're doing. And, I really wish you all the best.
Perfect. Thank you. And thank you for everything that you do.
Thanks so much. And everyone who joined us, whether you joined us live today, thank you so much for jumping in, dropping comments. I see a couple of likes and thumbs ups and hearts that are popping up on some of the other platforms. So please, please, please continue to give those because I just think the work that Stephanie and the team is doing is just amazing. And I just can't wait to, experience it as, as a consumer, but also as an entrepreneur, just, seeing vegan entrepreneurs always gets me excited. But if you do have any questions as a follow-up to any of these interviews, please use the comments wherever you are looking, or if you're listening to this in our podcast, let us know if you have any questions. We will always pass them over to Stephanie. But as always, thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you so much for taking some time out of your day. And I hope today was not only an inspiration, but also a doorway into all of our futures, especially as, key players in the vegan movement. All right. Thank you, everyone. I'll see you in
Bye.
the next interview. Bye.